The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Snapshot webinar. This is a really big and exciting one. Before I do anything at all, to my friends that are out there, Ankit, Brett, Clayton, crew, someone jump in, let us know that you can see a sign and you can hear me, because you know how to use these things because you've done it before. Thank you, Clayton. Alrighty. I want to first acknowledge First Nation people throughout this nation and where I'm speaking from on the traditional lands of the people of the Kulin Nation, the Wurundjeri people in Melbourne, and would like to acknowledge them as the traditional owners and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. This is what we've got on today. I'm going to start with a bit of housekeeping and introductions. We've got some pretty big snapshot updates to take you through. We're going to introduce Google's Environmental Insights Explorer, talk about community climate action, and have lots of time for Q&A. Before we get started, some uber quick housekeeping. Only presenters can be heard or seen during the presentation, a little bit different to Zoom and Google Meets that we're all so familiar with now. You're encouraged to ask questions whenever you like during the webinar. Type them into your GoToWebinar question box. We'll try and answer them as we go. Depending on the number of questions, we might wait until the end or afterwards. And if we don't have time, we'll always get back to you. Please try and be as specific, as clear as possible when writing your question. And note, we are recording the webinar too. Today is going to be probably a little bit on the casual side. Some of us are still in lockdown and even hard lockdown, so apologies if it gets even a little bit more sloppy into the uber casual side. We'll do our best. This is us and Ironbark. My name's Alexi Lynch from Ironbark Sustainability. We're an organisation that works with councils around Australia on climate change. We've been doing that for about 20 years, working on council assets, lighting buildings, the work, and broad climate programs where we take councils through approaches that involve insights, targets, development of evidence-based strategy and action planning. That is us. This is you. This is a really packed house today. We've had a lot of people respond, which is pretty awesome. We've got local governments representing 56% of Australia, state government attendees representing 79%, and state or local representing 92%. Which is great. And here is the breakdown of the people that are here today. Mainly Vic, New South Wales, Queensland, a couple of international guests as well, which is great. So we welcome you all here. We gave you the opportunity to ask a few questions in advance, and here they are. Don't worry about furiously taking down these notes and understanding the people that are here, because we will send you the presentation afterwards once you've given us some feedback, of course. We'll try and answer a lot of these. A lot of the data ones we will get to. Some of the other stuff around things like PPAs or shortfalls in funding under COVID, probably not for today, but there's a lot of other resources we can point you in the direction to for that. I'm now going to welcome Kathy Oak, Senior Advisor, Innovate for Cities at the Global Covenant of Mayors, City of Melbourne Councillor. I'm not sure how many hats I can put on you, Kathy, but I would like to welcome you and introduce you to tell us about what's going on, your work in this area, and say a few words. Kathy, hello.
Hello. Thank you, Lex. Yes, I think that all of my hats converge around the excitement, the presentations that we have today. So I thank you for asking me to provide a few words. I, of course, acknowledge that we are meeting on traditional lands. Here in Australia particularly, we pay our respects to traditional custodians, and I am on the Wurundjeri lands of the people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders both past, present and emerging as well. So of course we're all online because we know that cities are important in fighting against climate change. No single organisation, initiative, sector or government, however innovative or impactful, can do all of this transformation, systemic changes alone. You know, it requires a global community to fight against the climate crisis. And actually on that point, I acknowledge that we do have some of our colleagues calling in from the US and in particular from California, and I acknowledge and send our biggest hugs to you as you are dealing with your the severe wildfires that you're witnessing, and we only know that too well. So absolute respect to you in trying to fight the climate crisis over there as well, that we know is linked to those wildfires. So GCoM and Google have been working on the idea that unlocking proprietary data and technologies from the private sector and making it available for public benefit can really help to accelerate the actions, industries, investments to fight the climate crisis. It can better support city policy making efforts and accelerate the world's transition to a low carbon future. And this Ironbark Beyond Zero Emissions partnership really aims to enhance the capabilities of the Snapshot platform, which I just think is awesome, with real-time data integration. It will enhance the quality of data available for Australian councils. And as you can tell, hopefully you can hear that I'm pretty excited about that. Integrating Google's Environmental Insights Explorer, it's a major step forward. It ensure that Australian councils and their communities have the best knowledge, information and support to act on climate. And this Google GCoM partnership has now expanded to include, a universe of partners around the world, including Ironbark and BZE, who are directly supporting councils and community groups. This integration will initially focus on improving the granularity of transport data and in the Snapshot tool, and it will expand over time for other sectors. So while councils, of course, have got access to detailed transportation data, this Google integration provides a way to access comprehensive, regularly updated transport data. And what is being announced today is really only the beginning. And the data, the support and the insights will allow councils, including Melbourne and our communities who are really interested in this information, to make better and faster decisions to fight against climate change. And certainly, as people come back to our cities, and we need our people to come back to the cities and out of lockdown, learning how they live and work in a COVID normal existence is going to be crucial to continue our fight against climate action. We need to build our cities back better, and we need to focus on a green recovery, and having data like this in our hand is going to be a really important tool for us. And using the expertise of the likes of Ironbark, BZE, and all the partners who want to be part of this, all of the Google-derived data processed through Snapshot, it's going to be compliant with international standards and guidelines, including GCoM's Common Reporting Platform, so you know that it's robust, consistent, and methodologically sound. Addressing the barriers to data access through partnerships with Google, Ironbark, and BZE, we're elevating the consistency of data and the quality of city data to better make informed decisions around climate and energy policy, where to invest our money, and how to prioritize our initiatives. So the team from Ironbark and BZE, they've often talked about this journey and seeking to incorporate better and more accurate and more granular data and insights. It's been a long process, but I agree with their approach that it does need to be strategic and we need to work together. And I know that there are a lot of people online that know I am a big fan of avoiding duplication, and let's, we've got to work together. The power in cities is around collective voices and aggregated action, and this, this is one step in that process. And I really look forward to more organizations doing the work that I know of, those who've been really involved in this, Ironbark, BZE, Sustainability Victoria, the New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and Environment, Renew, ICLEI, C40, local government associations and regions of councils. I've seen the list of participants. I know that you've all been involved and really keen on this collective and collaborative approach. Snapshot is the first national tool with data for every municipality in Australia. It's pretty impressive. It's unique because it uses a common framework so that all of the local profiles match the national emissions total, and no emissions go unaccounted. And for every iterative change and improvement of data or methodology, it helps not just one council emissions profile, but all councils in Australia. And this is really, as I said already, it's an approach that we need to move forward to avoid that duplication. But having data experts in the room providing this information so the rest of us can do the work to plan and implement emissions reduction strategies and projects is, goodness, even more important now as we look to build back better. This is a phrase from Alexi, from Lex, it's exciting about the democratization of data. It's the underpinning principle of Snapshot. I'm sure you've heard him talk about that. It's free for councils and community groups to use, whether you're a capital city like Melbourne, or you're an officer in a regional centre, a manager in a rural or coastal community climate action group. This is for everyone, and that's just fabulous. And the example of the integration of the Google's transport data is just a case in point. Instead of individual councils or regions or even state governments approaching Google for a small bespoke data set, through Snapshot, the ask has been, let's get the data for everyone, and that's exactly what's happened. And so I encourage everyone to celebrate this announcement. Yes, of course, there's, let's not get into the weeds. Let's acknowledge the work that Ironbark and BZE and all the partners have done. It's an iterative, it's an interactive approach. Snapshot will continue in the background to improve the accuracy and the granularity of the data for all. But in the meantime, let's certainly look at the opportunities that this announcement bring to work better together to plan and deliver and track on climate action. And just my 8-minute mark, but I just want to acknowledge the work of Ironbark in particular, and I'm really excited about another collaboration that GCoM has started with Ironbark, looking at climate actions of cities across the world so that we can really get to understand the knowledge needs of cities, not just in Australia, but for all of the 10,000 GCoM cities. We're looking at knowledge needs so that we can best invest action in the innovation that is required. And that's through the Innovate for Cities pillar that I'm coordinating and leading through GCoM that I'm really excited about. And Lex kindly has said that we can present some of that data at another webinar later on this year. So I look forward to that. And I now hand it back to you, Lex. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kathy. Yep, that next step, we often say that this is just the starting point. This work collating the data with BZE is just the insights, the platform, but we move on to the data, and where there are some pretty exciting projects around action planning and projects and picking projects up from Australia that I think and hope Imogen will talk about a bit about later as well. But this is really exciting, but it is still just the start. For those people that commented and said, where are Kathy's slides? No, there are none. Thank you for letting me know, though. It's good to know people are on the ball. Appreciate it. Many thanks, Kathy. I'm going to get in now and start talking about some updates and what's going on. So we now have 537 councils in Australia and 537 emissions profiles on Snapshot. You have the ability to check through multiple reporting periods. Also the ability to check through financial year and calendar year periods as well. I should note that originally it was calendar year from the user groups that were involved in developing Snapshot, bearing in mind this is not just a council tool. I know the majority of people on the line here are councils, but it is also for your community, your stakeholders to use, and a lot of people prefer calendar years, even though councils generally report on financial years. We have a lot of frequently asked questions. The questions that come in, we track, we put them online. So jump online and have a look. If you've got questions that are around broad issues or anything specific as well, they are all there. And we've also updated the methodology. The intention of Snapshot as well is to be transparent. Everyone should be able to see what's going on, what's happening under the bonnet. If you are one of those that wants to know exactly what is under the bonnet, that's where you should start. We've got social media tags. Communications is a big part of the Snapshot process, and some massive increases and improvements in data, and these I will get into some detail too in a second. And I think more than anything too, this is probably the key. This is not, a lot of councils out there worked with Ironbark 4 or 5 years ago with our profiles and those, grainy looking Excel graphs and spreadsheets. This is not something for us anymore. This is working with anyone really who wants to be involved, sharing this and making sure that, yeah, when we improve one profile, we improve all 537. So I want to thank those organisations that are involved in funding Snapshot over the last year: Local Government Association of NT, DPI New South Wales, SV, and the Lord Mayor's Charitable Foundation. And also a bunch of South Australian councils that are listed there, because in South Australia, we were trying to get some funding to get SA councils up, a bit hard to get. So 16, 17 councils said, you know what, let's chuck $2,000 each in and essentially crowdfund it, which is pretty awesome. And also those that have been through the weeds of the data over the last couple of years. One of the reasons Snapshot was developed was to remove the data collection, verification, and reporting obstacles. We don't have time, we don't think, to be mucking around duplicating processes around data. We need to share it, we need to be transparent and collaborative along the way. And so that is what has happened. ICLEI Oceania will be familiar to everyone out there. They've been involved in data reporting, the QA process for years, way back into the early 2000s, and have now removed the reporting barriers for councils in Australia who have joined the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate Energy or are interested in joining. Data from Snapshot is now ready to be used for reporting to these sort of international programs. So essentially it means it's already been checked. The methodology is of the highest quality, it's been verified and it's compliant with the protocols and standards. So this reporting side has been completed by ICLEI Oceania on your behalf. So if you're a bit concerned about joining GCoM because of reporting burdens, don't worry about it anymore. We've done that. We can now move on to the important stuff, which is, of course, reducing emissions. Snapshot has been used quite a bit over the last year or so throughout Australia, all states, territories, large, small councils, metro, rural. We're hearing back from councils and communities using Snapshot, and the main area is to target action areas to reduce emissions. In the words of Eric Lead from the City of Darwin just yesterday, we don't have time to muck around and do everything. We need to be specific with our targeting, and that's where Snapshot benefits the most. You can say, okay, where do we need to put our efforts into reducing emissions ASAP? Examples that we hear from Cairns recently, where climate youth organisations have used Snapshot to understand key sources of emissions and have used this information to talk to other stakeholders, to talk to council and say, right, this is where we need to look. Similar situation in Newcastle. Found this awesome slide just by chance the other day, where again it's used to try and express that these are the areas we need to focus on to reduce emissions. We've found that we've had questions from other consultants, which is great. We'd like to work with them, and others that have expertise in certain areas we want to bring on board. And we've also found that we've had groups of councils that have used it to communicate to the community. So the City of Bayside in Victoria, developing their climate emergency action plan, saying, right, here are where our emissions are from. Finally, we've had groups that are sort of some really leading regional groups that we're aware of. There's one in Melbourne Southeast that are using these profiles to really understand key emission sources, but then investigating further how to start engaging with community stakeholders. And I say community much broader than just residential community stakeholders, but in the broad sense of the word, commercial, industrial, where often we find most of the emissions are coming from. So Snapshot means that you can focus on, instead of collecting the data, generating the information that's required to make these decisions, you can actually get on with it and allocate your resources to real action. And that is pretty important because we have a little problem. And we have a climate emergency. It's pictures from the States and pictures from the US, and we all probably have seen these pictures from the last year or so. Whether you're setting science-derived targets, aiming for zero emissions by 2030, or looking at aligning with state targets, local targets, international targets, 2030 zero, we kind of all agree that we need to reduce emissions fast and damn fast. And what you see from your snapshot is the problem at hand. That's a lot of emissions. We also need to have a scaled response appropriate to this task at hand. So instead of having ad hoc or piecemeal approaches that might or might not be targeting the right areas, a proportionally scaled response looking at these profiles means being strategic in where exactly we are targeting action, because we need to get these to zero really quickly. There are 100 people on this line at the moment. It is maxed out, so anyone else who's trying to knock on the door now cannot come into this webinar who absolutely understand this, right? You've developed the climate action plans over the years. You've led the zero carbon community groups. You've acted, you've been involved in energy efficiency, PPAs, solar on buildings, launched behaviour change programs and education campaigns in the community, and declared climate emergencies. Having the appropriate scaled response to a climate emergency means more than ever taking an evidence-based approach to what these profiles are telling you. So it means understanding the implications of your emissions when designing climate strategies and developing climate action plans. Climate emergency demands quantified and evidence-based approach to responding to exactly what the data is telling us, which we can do. Everyone can do, because we are all into data, right? We have a great understanding and a much greater appreciation that we need to know what is happening where and why in order to manage things. Data and evidence helps us to understand how we need to act in certain ways, where the sources of a problem is coming from, why it's happening the way it is, and then how we best target interventions to manage and improve things. So whether we are talking about a pandemic or a climate emergency, we need to use this in smart and strategic ways to inform decisions and actions. So now with Snapshot, we have an understanding of what is happening where. We know why we have to act. And so the next step is, of course, using this evidence, this data, to inform the strategies and actions to take. Now, just like an embattled president or prime minister or local official using new and more accurate daily data as it comes to hand with COVID, we're accessing more and better data when it comes to climate and Snapshot, and that's the last COVID analogy, I promise you. We're getting better. Those who have been to previous webinars, and I know that a lot here have seen slides like this where we talk about bringing everyone on board and having peer reviewers. When data comes on board, it's checked. We get as many people as we can to be involved. We're lucky enough as well to have someone that was involved in writing the book, essentially, on the global community protocol on emissions. And behind the scenes over the last 4 or 5 years, we've had a team doing just this. So improving iteratively. Through snapshots, when we improve one, we improve all. One of the questions we often get from councils, and as I say, we do track them all regarding Snapshot, is around data granularity and your emissions from electricity. Can we get better data from Powercore, City Power, Energex, Endeavour, Essential, Sapin, whoever it might be? Where is that granular information? In fact, it actually came up twice again in this webinar, a little bit. It comes up a lot. Can we get data from DNSPs? We want to have this information at the granular level. The answer is yes, as long as it is compliant with the protocol. So it's got to be complete, consistent, and relevant. And I'm not going to get into it now because we have got into it many times before, but generally for about 32,400 reasons or excuses over the years, it's not. Those reasons are for another day, but we still have challenges being able to verify the data from third-party sources. But I've got a question for everyone out there. What if we can get it? So what do we do if we can source more accurate, complete, compliant data from distribution businesses for your council area? Do you want us to include it in your Snapshot profile? I'm going to launch a poll, and I hope you can see a poll there, and I'd like you to spend a few minutes answering it, please. What should we do? So you've seen the data before, I'm sure, and they send it to you and it's a nice Excel spreadsheet. You know, it's got decimal places, so hell, it must be accurate. We've been getting it as well, but too often we've found issues with it. If we can get it, and we'll spend a few months checking it, should we include it? Yes. Thank you for the 65% that voted. Yes, of course we should. I totally agree. What this means is that there are implications for profiles as they change. As we get better and more accurate data, better source of information, profiles will incorporate them, and they may change. Generally, it's not going to be a large one because we're pretty comfortable with the data sources that we've got already. But as they come about, it is absolutely possible that we see changes that probably won't reflect or impact on decision making. They won't be that large, but you will see changes. And if we ever get that DNSP data, we're going to see some minor changes. And this is likely to be why snapshots go up and down. And this is exactly what's happened recently, as we've found a couple of big improvements that I'd like to just quickly go through now. One of them is around industrial emissions. So we had some new data sources, so we've always had data sources around industrial emissions throughout Australia, but they're been pretty dispersed. And recently the ABS released new data that filled in a really key gap that meant we could use information from Australian energy statistics data to reconcile some key sources. And it means we can now trace heavy industry a lot better. So people working in mines, heavy manufacturing, technicians, and subsets of data, as opposed to perhaps someone that just does work for an organisation that is an industrial emitter, but perhaps has a white collar job in the city. So what we do is we correlate this with other data sets to make sure it's more granular. And what you'll see from your profiles from 2018 onwards, that this has been incorporated. So it might mean there's change from 2017 to 2018, because in 2017 we did not have this information. And we didn't want to change it retrospectively to confuse people that have been using it, but often the changes are due to things like this when we get improvements. What this also means is that there's a small change to commercial allocation. The data from Australian Energy Statistics means that we essentially have more contemporary information and data, so there's a reallocation from industrial to commercial and vice versa. All this is on the FAQs. If you've got specific questions about your council, please just email us hello@snapshotclimate.com.au and we'll get back to you. We try and get back to you in a week or two. The more polite you are, the quicker you get a response. There's also finally a change in ag emissions, and this will probably keep coming because it's a little bit harder. We've corrected a discrepancy in inter-year scaling, and so this can be a little bit seasonal and challenging at times. So interpolations of data, so there's no gaps anymore. We've also added poultry, improved segregation of ag soil emissions by allocating by specific crop types. So that again improves everything and makes it a little more granular. I'm only giving the high level discussion on this. I'm not a data expert, and we've got others that would be able to answer in more detail. And of course, if you want to get into the detail, you can look at the methodology, you can speak to us. All I will say is when you see this nice little green part of the pie with agriculture and we make a few changes, what sits underneath the CSV file for ag at the moment is literally 3 million cells being used. So there is a lot that goes on underneath the bonnet behind the scenes. If you're an expert in this and you want to be involved, then let us know. A couple of years ago, you might have seen webinar presentations like this. This is from something from, well, the first one's from a Sustainability Victoria webinar 3 years ago, another one from a couple of years ago with Snapshot, talking about how we're trying to improve bit by bit. We're wondering how can we get better data around, say, transport or use smart meter informations. Hopefully you've seen this. One of the big challenges has been transport. We've often thought, who can we get information on transport for? Because DNSPs and energy is hard enough. Private vehicles, business vehicles, even harder, and it's always modelled unless we can actually get, I don't know, e-tag providers or Telstra or someone. It is absolutely a journey, to try and make sure that we can find this information, and once we get it, we send it and include it with everyone. When we were looking at that slide in the top left in 2017, to be honest, we thought it would be a bit of a pipe dream that one day we could actually find a bit of a treasure trove of data. But today is pretty awesome to be able to announce that we do have access to this now through a partnership with Google. It's taken the last couple of years, 2 years, we've been working with Google on trying to access transport data, which means that for your transport part of the pie, instead of just having this high level model information, we now can break it down further. Again, there's a simple percentage breakdown at the top. Underneath, there's a lot more going on. we're absolutely thrilled to announce that we've got this partnership with them, and we can use data from EIE, their Insights Explorer, into snapshots. You know, it is a bit of a game changer, we think. It's bandied around a lot these days, but this is something that is now incorporated into 100 council profiles, and we will have another 100 odd in the next month or so. If your name is there, lucky for you. I'm going to move on, but you can get this list when you download the slides. But what it means is that we can start looking at more detailed profiles, more detailed and intelligent interventions that we can better model, looking at the data and evidence, because we know that we need to be guided by the evidence, right? EIE's release in Australia means councils now also have access to a much richer landscape, and as a part of the partnership, we're also launching or releasing EIE today. I'm going to pass over to Nicole, or I think maybe Mike at EIE in a moment, and there are some quotes there from some of the councils that have started checking it out over the last couple of weeks, but also want to thank the team at Google and congratulate them, because it's been a couple of years to get to this point. We've been working behind the scenes pretty furiously with them, and we basically said to Google, can you give us data for everyone? And they said we will. It's pretty extraordinary that, you know, sometimes we're still struggling to get data from distribution businesses, local utilities, sometimes run by state governments, and we can't, and it's been 20 years. And here we have Google, who have pivoted and said, sure, we'll give you the transport data. They also have a pretty good understanding of the bigger picture, and knowing that this is just the start, and the next few years will actually just get a hell of a lot more exciting. I'm going to change presenters to Mike, I believe. So I'm going to introduce Mike Tavendale from Google. Are you there, Mike? And do you want to share your screen? I can see your screen. You need to unmute yourself or talk.
Great. And Lex, can you hear me okay? This isn't actually Nicole.
Nicole Lombardo and Mike Tavendale, hello to both of you.
Great. Super. And thanks so much. And it does look like our slides are showing up. So that's success. It's always never fun when it doesn't. But so yes, Mike's going to help sort of advance some of the slides so we can share some of our exciting work. But yeah, first to just again, thank you for that intro, Lex, and Kathy kind of said, you know, summarized the exciting sort of partnership work that we've been doing in conjunction with GCoM and now of course Ironbark and BZE. It's been an exciting and many months in the working. So it's a thrill to just be here to join the conversation. So a special thanks to Kathy, Imogen, and Lex for allowing us to join you all, and to you all for letting us to jump into the party, so to speak. My name is Nicole Lombardo, and as Lex mentioned, you know, we've been in conversation for a while. I lead partnerships within the GEO organization for our environmental insights team. And, you know, just a few minutes here, just to, you know, comment on a couple of things, but, you know, wanted before I dive into.
Can I just jump in really quickly, Nicole? And we've had a few people commenting. The screens look like we're only getting 2/3 of the slide, and that I'm getting that as well, actually. Do you want to just have a quick check? We can just see it says eaters and can't see the whole leaders thing.
There we go.
So we can see your slides, but it wasn't the whole thing. So I can see helping civic leaders. Now go to the other view. Let's have a look.
Well, maybe we could just, I can advance that way. Does this work?
Yeah, but now we can see the draft view. So we haven't got the full view yet. Do you want to try and click on present? Yeah. Let's see if it comes up now. Don't know whether that's, I think it's funny. It's still sort of just zooming into a small part of your presentation.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can just, there you go. Is that better?
Do you want to scroll?
Fix it. I think
bring it up a little bit so it's on the whole screen. If you look at your dashboard up the top or your sharing, you should be able to see what the screen is showing.
Why don't I go ahead with that? And I know we are don't have a ton of time.
Yeah.
But just to kind of to quickly just touch on, I think between Kathy and Lex, I think you all set us up so well. So I think just to dig in a little bit on the sort of what's behind the new data sets that we're actually now surfacing in Snapshot. So backing up, it all starts with our geospatial data. And as I mentioned, I'm part of the Geo organization. And what you see here on screen is actually it's an actual overhead image of obviously you can see where we are looking using satellite. Actually this is in this case high resolution imagery, looking down on roofs and buildings. And what we were able to do with it is to drive wonderful insights around sort of the heights and the widths and the orientations of the building. And then what we did after that was we brought in weather data to be able to then, what you're probably guessing here is to see the sun path going above and over the building shapes. And what we can do with that is create this incredible shade model that then tells us for every pixel of every building that you see, how much potential solar energy you can produce. And so that's just one classic example of where we're actually harnessing the power of geospatial data to then derive environmental insights. And so when we discovered that we could do some of this work a few years ago, we said to ourselves, we should be investing more and seeing how we can really arm cities with, and the fact that we've been, sort of mapping buildings and seeing how, sort of transport is flowing across cities is how can we harness that treasure trove of data to be able to drive insights. And so we started with cities because we know, and Mike, if maybe you can go to the next slide, because we know that they're the sort of the hub of activity for society. And so, when we look at sort of the global emissions, where global emissions resides, it's in that hub of activity. And so, when we teamed up with Global Covenant of Mayors over 2 years ago, and understanding and working with their 10,000 signatories, we understood really clearly that, what was holding them back from actually taking action on the commitments they were setting was just having simple access to data. Next slide. And when you think about sort of when we sort of did some of that early work with GCoM, one of the things that we learned pretty quickly was, and I guess, as we're discussing today, is that simply there are 4 key areas which we think that if we can bring our data and technology to the table, we think we can help overcome the barriers. So which is, of course, universal access to data that's consistent, and as Lex mentioned, compliant with some of the standard protocols and methodologies. Secondly is, having the sort of teaming up with the people and the expertise in the field. And so again, that's where partnerships with Ironbark, BZs is definitely, helping bringing in this data into the hands of cities that are currently working and focusing on solving, the problem of measuring emissions. And then 2 is, we think, and 3 and 4, I should say, is, where we see that tools like our data in tools like Snapshot are really, really helping to streamline and digitize the process for cities so that it can save the time and resources. And having sat down with several government teams in the past few years, it is one thing that we've heard loud and clear is that governments, this is not, measuring emissions is not the fun and sexy part of the business. And it's much more of looking to how you can actually focus your time and resources on the strategy and implementation. And so, and this is something that, we're really excited because we finally think in sort of the integrations with Snapshot and the way that they're harnessing our data is exactly that. This next slide. So just to come off of some exciting announcements this week and just to add to our highlighting our partnership here, we are setting our own next level of ambition across Google. So the Environmental Insights Explorer, as was launched 24 months ago, with this vision of being able to surface global data sets that can be consistent and easily accessible and freely accessible. And we set on that path, and last year scaling to 100, and then just this week now hitting a massive milestone to be able to make it now accessible to more than 3,000 cities. So this data and our models and our back sort of the back end of the platform is now working to serve several thousand. And our first going back to months ago when we sat down with the team at Ironbark and BZ, it was that the looking at the potential of what we could do if we were able to make transport data accessible to several, and I would like to say hundreds of councils across Australia at once. We all got really excited in it, and it has been a huge lift, and we're excited to that today that we can actually be showing kind of the final output of it. The next slide. And just to kind of finish off here, so what really behind the Snapshot tool, I'll sort of we mentioned the Environmental Insights Explorer is sort of our, as I say, a data showcase of where the world can see what kind of data sets we are surfacing now using Google and our maps data. And you can see here, we talked a little bit about our buildings work where we're using buildings to size and create 3D models. But the real exciting piece, which, again, Lex and team got really excited about, was the transport data, where what we're doing is we're actually aggregating and anonymizing activity data that you sort of, as an entire year across devices, as we can take that, anonymize that information, and then roll it up and show users, break down that into, number one is how many kilometers have traveled in the year. We could break it down by traveling, coming into the city, traveling around the city, going out of the city, and we can also then start to break it down using machine learning to infer the types of modes that people are traveling. And that's where it gets really exciting, because then cities can quickly see not only, what was sort of the baseline of activity, but then they can start to see what are the largest sources of or modes that are driving the sources of emissions across transit. And so now to be able to bring that data forward into Snapshot so that you have not only more accurate, probably understanding of the activity on the ground, but now you can actually start to really crack into the strategies that might help reduce that. So giving you, again, some indications of whether or not electrifying, single passenger vehicles might be a wonderful, sort of the best bang for your buck, or if it's really incentivizing, the public transport systems. And so, so again, really excited to see kind of what's next, now that we're making that data available in Snapshot. And just a last quick slide to just, like I said, this is just recapping, I think, what, again, just to echo the thrill and excitement for our entire team and on behalf of our Google team, just to be able to team up here in Australia with Ironbark, BZ, and just to be able to finally now have access in our data in several councils so that we can start to really envision, kind of this next decade of climate action and hopefully be our most ambitious one yet. So thanks, Lex, for letting us jump in here, and happy to take questions. I know we're trying to sort of wrap things up, so.
Awesome. No, that's fantastic. Thank you so much for that, Nicole. And Mike at the other end, I think we'll be having another one of these webinars in the next couple of weeks to get into any of these things in a little bit more detail. And I've just done a quick slide that I brought from the start to let everyone else out there know that we went through this on Monday morning and Wednesday morning and all the slides with Google, who are calling in from LA. And yeah, often IT things happen. So there we go. I'm so glad I put that caveat in that things might get a little bit sloppy, but we tried our best. I can fill you in on who these people are at another time, Nicole, Kerem, and Mike. But now over to Imogen Jubb, who has been central to the development and progress of Snapshot over the last couple of years. And if you're not interested or looking and seeing what BZE have been doing in the last couple of months, you're missing out, and it's been pretty exciting stuff. Imogen, I'm making you a panelist, presenter, should I say. Over to you.
All right, can you guys see the Beyond Zero Emissions screen?
Perfect.
Perfect. So for those of you who don't know, Beyond Zero Emissions has been around for more than 10 years. We're a think tank that shows how Australia can thrive through a transition to a zero carbon economy, and we've been recognised internationally and nationally for our work in many different ways. We make change through various different ways. We do lots of research, and we work with business and industry leads around the country to develop strategies and investment. And I work as the Zero Carbon Communities Manager and work really closely with communities all around the country to develop plans and realise opportunities to get to zero emissions. Our vision for Zero Carbon Communities is an ever-growing network of communities all across the country working together to achieve zero carbon status. And the first zero carbon community started in 2015. It was Zero Emissions Byron. And I came on shortly after that to work with 3 zero carbon communities in Victoria. And we now have over 100 communities all across the country. And there are probably many more who are doing the same sort of thing, but not necessarily affiliated with BZE. We have also been working really hard this year in light of the COVID situation on our Million Jobs plan. It was released in June and demonstrated that Australia can create millions of jobs by becoming a renewable energy superpower. And there are many different ways that we can create those jobs, build back better and deliver zero emissions outcomes. So just as an example, there are close to 1 million jobs alone in the buildings sector, where we can do retrofits and new buildings to deliver jobs to communities all across the country. And anywhere there are buildings, those jobs can be created. So just for example, there are over 150,000 jobs, to build 150,000 social houses, you would create almost 500,000 jobs over 5 years. And to do 2.5 million energy retrofits in buildings would create 500,000 jobs over 5 years as well. I just wanted to highlight the social media function on Snapshot. If you're a council officer, I'd encourage you to share this information with your local communities and see if you can use that as a way to get them engaged. We know that even the best resourced and the best intentioned councils cannot achieve this work on their own. They need to be working in partnership with their community to achieve it. And likewise, if you're a community group, I'd encourage you to share this with your council and start discussions around what steps and actions it will take to reduce these emissions in your local area. We are also trying to integrate with the Million Jobs work and figure out what it would take to what jobs it would take to reduce these emissions to zero in each sector. So how many jobs would there be in Newcastle, for example, to reduce the transport emissions or the electricity emissions in each different category. And we have done a little bit of work on that. So we've been working really closely with the Hunter community, which Newcastle is based in, over the last year, and identified about 10,000 jobs in the Hunter region on energy efficient housing over a 5-year period, as well as jobs in electrification of public transport and buses. So there'd be about 60 jobs in the manufacturing of these buses and 182 long-term jobs until 2050. So I think there's a real role for local councils to play in helping to identify the local jobs that will reduce these emissions. And BZE and IMBAC are exploring how to do that effectively as well. So another thing to note about BZE is that we run with the support of amazing volunteers who contribute to our research, to our administration, to our advocacy, through our community engagement. We really couldn't do the work we do without our volunteers. And I'd encourage you, if you're a council officer, again, if you have local community groups who are interested in sustainability and zero emissions pathways, point them in the direction of the Zero Carbon Communities Network, because we can provide a lot of resources and support and connect them with other community groups trying to do the same thing all across the country. Thank you.
Okay, how do I grab the screen back from you? Me.
Maybe just another thing to note is that today the economic modelling from the Million Jobs Plan was released, and there's an article in the Australian Financial Review about it, demonstrating that about $25 billion of private investment can be unlocked to help achieve those outcomes.
Great. Thank you, Imogen. Any questions, please jump into your Q&A question box on control panel. I'm going to ask a few questions now. We've got 10 minutes for questions, which is great. And to the people on the line, Kerem, Nicole, Kathy, Matt, Imogen, if we could try and keep them to sort of 30, 40 seconds, just so we can get through as many as possible. A question, I'm thinking this is for the crew at EIE. Any plans to drill down into major institutions or places people gather, for example, tertiary education campuses?
That's a good one. We so when it comes down to our transit data, our transport data that we've surfaced, it's, while we have incredible coverage across several countries in the world, one of the few limitations we do have is privacy limitations. And so where we're not able to render insights is actually kind of below sort of a threshold of around population levels around 25, 30,000. And so when we look at smaller kind of, you know, I would say whether it's districts or institutions, we run into that issue. So there are ways that we can probably team up. You know, we have other parts of our organization that works on this bit too. So, but for EIE's purpose of just sort of calculating emission estimates, that's one of the limitations, single limitations for transport data.
Thanks, Nicole. Question from Ming. Can EIE break down emissions by postcode to allow data to be more useful at local government level? I'm going to start by answering that and say, yes, so can Snapshot, so can anything, but it's not actually granular, accurate data. It's still being modelled, and that, I guess I refer to the previous point around getting that information actually from distribution businesses. So you'll see that when we started talking to Google a few years ago, we've got better data here in Australia on emissions from, you know, stationary energy. We have a better understanding about how it all works, and so we said to Google, please help with transport. But the broader emissions data, it's a little bit more challenging. So it's there, but I'm not necessarily sure whether it actually means it's more accurate. It's just cut, sliced, and diced in a different way. Nicole, did you want to quickly speak to that one? Can EIE break down emissions by postcode?
So we are not able to. So I think a good example of what the sort of levels of granularity that we can go within our transport emissions estimates is to just, you could go on the insights.sustainability.google site and you can see we sort of cut it off at the city level. And as I was mentioning before about the population limit. So maybe in near future we could, but not today.
Yeah, and this is awesome, but it is just the start. Carly, I get to answer your question because you started by saying absolutely loving this. Thank you. And then you said, does it have capability for urban canopy mapping? Are there any plans for this? Nicole or Mike?
Oh, that's a good one. So it actually is a great kind of lead in. We certainly are, you know, for the last few years, we were really focused on sort of buildings and transit because we know those are sort of some of the world's largest sources of emissions. And if we can bring data to the table in those sectors, like we think that that's a good place to start. We are now that we've scaled sort of data access to thousands of data or cities around the world, our next step is to start to embark on other solutions that we can surface insights to help explore. So you can see, I think on EIE today, we have solar as one. We're certainly investigating other solutions, and urban sort of ecology, forestry is one that we have certainly looked at more carefully. So we will be certainly working closely with Ironbark and our teams there to kind of pilot new data sets, new ideas. And so if you have, thoughts, I certainly welcome you to bring it to the table with Lex and team, and we can start to sort of understand better where are the biggest areas of opportunities for Australia, and think about how we could team up on new data sets in the future. So great question, and hopefully you'll have some suggestions for the team.
And there are some more coming in on that, similar to that. So these are all tracked. And in the survey at the end, that of course everyone's going to answer, we'll ask, what do you want to hear about at this next webinar? Because I think we'll need one to talk about that in detail. A question, and Matt, get ready to unmute yourself, and maybe Hannah as well. How is green and renewable energy accounted for in Snapshot? From Brett from Port Phillip.
Hey, it's green renewable energy is accounted for in several locations. So firstly, so that those numbers are incorporated into the emissions coefficients as published in the National Greenhouse Accounts, which are updated annually. So that's for large-scale renewable supplied energy. For distributed, so embedded generation, we have factors that accommodate the consumption in that sector. We also, one of the updates to this industrial and commercial energy updates, what it did was it also integrated some of the embedded generation characteristics. Note that those particular elements are still scaled from the state level. So that means we're not currently incorporating at sort of local or it's like, micro level, so individual organizational level renewable generation. For residential, we are. So we're taking the STC data sets and using them at their postcode level to allocate to the residential sector. There's obviously a little bit of a crossover with small and medium enterprise because they're not differentiated by that characteristic, but that's okay because it's not going to introduce double counting. It just might introduce a slight misallocation between the residential and commercial sectors.
Thanks.
We can go into more details later.
Yep, Brett, you can join one of our working groups, I think, for that as well. Someone's asked, will there be regular annual updates and releases of data? Yeah, absolutely. At least annual. We also need, funding and resourcing to keep it going. There's a lot of interest in Snapshot. So also do keep an eye out for ways to help out, whether it is through funding, subscription models, we're not sure yet, or whether we, try and make sure that states, feds, whoever else can fund this. But as soon as we get the better data, as I mentioned, and this is the whole concept, we improve and update it for everyone, not just for one or two. There's a question about the next developments and what are we looking for next. So data still is a big one, but as Imogen mentioned, we're also looking at ways to incorporate action planning. You have your snapshot, you can see where your emissions are from, but what does it mean? How do you click on maybe say this thing that says transport and understanding the data that sits behind around economic indicators and the wealth of information is there? How can that be used to actually help target the right interventions? Imogen, did you want to add a really quick addition to that?
Yeah, we're constantly thinking about how to make this better and lead into the sort of next steps for communities and for councils to take. So one of the big things on the agenda is action plans and how to help automate that process, at least so you've got templates to start with, so you don't have council officers doing the same kind of work all over the place. And also better visualization of data, how to represent things like negative emissions. So, if your community takes heaps of solar panels, how do you show that in this kind of information? How do you visualize data across multiple years in a easy, accessible way? And how do you integrate things like jobs and the cost of electricity for your whole community, for example, into this kind of information? So they're things we've got at concept stage. Again, it will take a bit of funding and resourcing to deliver that, but we're working on it.
Thank you. Strategies for establishing a zero carbon community. I might just say that you need to just contact BZE immediately because they will do that better than anybody, and they're also tracking the zero carbon communities around Australia. Is Snapshot planning on including how each municipality compares to others relative to size? That is an awesome question, Shelley. You can do that through what we call cohort mapping. But what I'm going to do is write down a reminder to pass on a link, or actually just jump onto our FAQ pages and search for the term comparison. And it tells you a bit about why you can do that, but it can be a little fraught. Final question or two. Will transport data break down agricultural emissions, and will there be transport data for regional areas? From Stephen. Nicole, what do you do with someone's population 12,000 and low urban density?
It's certainly something that we have actually been doing. We've been, I'd say, more in piloting. We have released county level summaries, analysis in the last year, and something we're seeing a continued trend where inventories are being done at sort of the regional level. And so I certainly see where we could be more supportive there in the future. So it's certainly something to come. But yes, we've been starting to pilot. So if there's interest in any folks here, please again through Snapshot, reach out to us.
Great, thank you. Someone has asked on urban canopy cover, would it be more accurate to use near maps as it's more up to date? Do you know what near maps is? Matt, do you want to jump in and just give us a quick yes or no on that as well?
Canopy cover for That's for looking at solar opportunity.
Yeah.
So that's currently sort of more in Google's bag for the EIE data set.
Are you guys familiar with Nearmap? Google, I'm assuming that's a proprietary term, Lindsay. Is that what you're getting to?
Yeah, certainly. We all, as far as different imagery sources, yes. I think, there's, as far as kind of the imagery itself, we, on the Google side, I can only speak for Google, not so much for Nearmap, but for Google, we certainly today, our collection programs consist of, sources of imagery that, are refreshed on a daily basis to then, we have some imagery sources that at very high resolution don't get, updated, may get updated every year, 2 years, 3 years. And so we think having, there's obviously the benefit of all these imagery sources now working in conjunction. We've also seen where some of the higher resolution imagery sources can provide great training data sets for things like machine learning, which we're, invested heavily in where we can. So, so I think, as far as building any future models or data sets, when it comes to the work that we do, we certainly look at, from a user's use case potential is understanding what is the type of refresh rate that is likely to be expected. And so, and where, from a tracking standpoint, how often would you start to see changes in the landscape, and then determining what type of imagery source can sort of be a reliable, consistent data set that we can sort of build models on top of. So the great news is there's lots of hardware out there now when it comes to getting photorealistic imagery, and now, at least on the Google side, we tend to try to pull our best resources forward to build models that can scale to hundreds, if not thousands, of cities, as you're seeing with EIE.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicole. The final question here is, so how do we access it? That's a really good question, Kelly. I've just sent you and everyone a link where you can get the slides. And that we're after some feedback there as well. So if you want to know the 100 councils, if you want to know the questions and all that, please just give us like 1 minute of feedback, and you'll get the slides. We'll also send an email from, you'll get an automated email from GoToWebinar following this, and we'll make sure it's in there as well. Or just Google Insights Explorer. I think it's insights.sustainability.google. Nicole, is that correct?
Yep, that's it.
Yep. Insights.sustainability.google. Insights.sustainability.google. Yeah, that's an oversight. Sorry for not putting it up there. But you can jump in and have a look through there. Thank you, everybody, for attending today. Thank you especially to Kathy, Imogen, Matt, Mike, Nicole. I think I've got everyone. We also had Hannah and Kerem in the back end waiting and ready to answer questions if need be. We are very excited by this. As you can tell, we're also, as you can tell, and as we always bang on about too, no, it is just the start. But we really appreciate you guys all coming along and being part of this journey, I guess. We're really open for people that want to come and be involved even further, and there will be opportunities to do that. The intention is that this is something that we are all in this together. So once we improve for one or two, it's for everyone. And the best way to do that is to share the learning, share what's happening, and just let us know if you've got a contact or if you've got news of someone perhaps from a DNSP that's looking at maybe being a little bit more open with their data, or someone that's an expert in visualizations or in economic activity. Get onto BZE, get onto us, just get onto Snapshot. We'll do our best. We will try and we will have another webinar or two, I think, in the next few months. And on that feedback form that I put there, and it's in the chat function, and I'm putting there again and again and again, you can actually tell us what would you prefer to hear about. More on EIE, more on solar, more on reporting. Let us know, and we'll make sure that the next one is focused towards that. This recording will be made available in the next couple of days. Otherwise, really appreciate everyone coming along, and we will chat to you at the next one. Thank you very much.